3 hours into my brother Marcus's engagement party, the hotel manager in a pressed black suit walked straight past my father, past my brother, past the future in-laws, and stopped in front of me. I was holding a serving tray. 200 guests were mid-conversation, mid-laugh, mid-champagne sip. And then he spoke. "Is everything to your satisfaction tonight?" The ballroom went quiet in that particular way rooms do when something shifts that cannot be unshifted. "My name is Claire. I am 28 years old." And at the moment those words landed, I was wearing a white catering apron that my father had handed me that same afternoon, looked me in the eyes, and told me to put on or go home. I put it on. I had my reasons. I know you already have questions forming, and I want to name them because they're the right ones. Why was I serving at my own brother's engagement party in the first place? Why did my father want me in an apron, in a room full of people he was trying to impress, in front of the very family his golden son was about to marry into? What did that hotel manager know that every single person in my family did not? And what was sitting folded and quiet in my coat pocket underneath that apron the entire night that made this moment not just possible, but inevitable? Those 4 questions are going to get answered tonight. Every single one of them, but not all at once, because that is not how this story actually happened, and I promised myself I would tell it the way it felt, not the way it looks tidied up from the outside. To understand what happened in that ballroom, I need to take you back about 6 years. Back to a kitchen table in a suburb just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Back to a 16-year-old girl who had just won a county science fair, come home with a trophy, and sat down at that table alone because her father had taken her older brother to celebrate a soccer game instead. She sat there long enough to understand something that would take her years to fully name. Working harder than everyone else in the room does not automatically mean being seen. Sometimes the people closest to you have already decided what you are worth, and no amount of effort is going to change their vote. If you have ever been the one in your family who carries the weight and gets handed the apron instead of the applause, I think tonight you are going to feel very seen. Stay with me, because the manager is only the beginning. My name is Claire Hendricks. I grew up in Franklin, Tennessee, about 20 minutes south of Nashville, in a 4-bedroom house with a well-kept front lawn that my father treated like a personal billboard. We looked like the right kind of family from the outside. That was always the priority. There are 4 of us. My father, Robert, spent 30 years in sales management, and somewhere along the way decided that his reputation was the most valuable thing he owned. Not his relationships, not his word, his image. The version of our family that existed at neighborhood barbecues and church socials and company dinners was carefully maintained, and anything that complicated that version got quietly moved to the edges. My brother Marcus is 3 years older than me. He is naturally charming in the way that makes rooms easier for everyone, and my father has built his entire sense of pride around him since Marcus scored his first varsity touchdown when he was 16. That was the moment I watched my father's face do something I had never seen it do before. He looked complete. I filed that away. My mother, Diane, is genuinely kind. In private, she is warm and attentive, and she has always loved me in the ways she knew how. But in public, beside my father, she becomes someone else entirely. Smaller. Agreeable. She has never once interrupted him when it actually mattered, and I stopped waiting for her to start doing that somewhere around my 14th birthday. By the time I was 12, I had already mapped the power structure of our household, and the clearest version of it was our dinner table. Marcus sat at my father's right hand every single night. My mother sat at his left. I sat at the far end, closest to the kitchen, because I was the one who got up to refill things. Nobody assigned me that seat. It just became mine. When I was 17, my grandmother Ruth, my father's mother and the quietest sharp person I have ever known, pressed a small brass keycard holder into my palm at her kitchen table and said simply, "Keys belong to people who show up, Claire." I did not fully understand what she meant. I kept it anyway. What exactly she had placed inside that keycard holder and why she chose only me is a question I did not have the answer to for nearly a decade. I want to show you 3 moments because I need you to understand that what happened at that engagement party was not a bad night or a misunderstanding or my father being thoughtless on one occasion. This was a pattern. It had been running for years before I had the language to name it. The first moment happened when I was 16. My science fair project took first place at the county level. I had worked on it for 6 weeks, staying up past midnight more times than I could count, and when the results were announced, I came home genuinely proud of myself in a way I had not felt before. My father was not there to see it. That same evening, he had taken Marcus to a travel soccer game 2 hours away, and when I called to tell him I had won, he said the trophy would still be there tomorrow and hung up.
It was.
He never asked to see it. The second moment stretched across 4 years. When I was 19, I enrolled in community college and worked 2 jobs simultaneously, a morning shift at a property management office and weekend hours at a hotel front desk to cover my own tuition and expenses. During those same 4 years, Marcus attended Vanderbilt University on a full living allowance from my parents. The difference between what Marcus received and what I received was roughly $14,000 per year. Across 4 years, that totals $56,000. When I eventually brought this up carefully and privately with my father, he told me that Marcus had more potential to return the investment. He said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. The third moment came when I was 22. I had just been offered a position managing a small portfolio of commercial properties in Nashville, which was a real and meaningful professional opportunity for someone my age. I told my father at dinner, quietly, proud again in that careful way I had learned to be proud. 2 weeks later, at Thanksgiving, he told the extended family I was doing some kind of real estate errand work. The hidden ledger across those years is not complicated math. $56,000 in family financial support that never reached me. 4 years of my career described as errand work at every family gathering, and a running total of 0 public acknowledgments from my father for anything I built. I never screamed about any of it. I never posted. I only worked. Then Marcus got engaged, and my father saw one more chance to show everyone exactly where I stood. Marcus announced his engagement to a woman named Sophie at a family dinner in January. She was warm and genuine, and I liked her immediately, which made everything that followed harder in a specific way I was not prepared for. By February, my father had booked the ballroom at the Harrington Grand Hotel in downtown Nashville for a 200-guest engagement party. He mentioned it to me in passing, the way you mention a logistical detail to someone whose opinion you are not seeking. The trigger arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at my desk when my phone lit up with a text from my father. It read, "We need you there early to help coordinate the staff. Where's something you can move in?" I read it once. I read it again. I set the phone face down on my desk and looked out the window for a moment. 20 minutes later, a second message came through. It said, "Marcus and Sophie need this to be perfect. This is not about you." I want you to sit with that sentence for just a second. This is not about you. As if my only possible role in my brother's engagement party was to make it about myself by simply existing as a guest. I read both messages sitting at my actual desk, inside the actual management office of the Harrington Grand Hotel in downtown Nashville, where I had been the silent ownership stakeholder for the past 2 years. When Grandma Ruth passed, her commercial investment trust transferred to me at 26, exactly as her estate attorney James had arranged. The Harrington Grand was the centerpiece of that trust. My father had booked his golden son's engagement party at his daughter's hotel without knowing it, and he had texted his daughter from that same hotel's event booking confirmation to tell her to show up early and wear something she could move in. I did not respond to either message right away. Instead, I called Linda, my property manager, a steady and unflappable woman who had run the Harrington Grand for 11 years and knew every detail of the ownership transfer. I told her my family had booked the venue for a private event and asked her to handle the evening exactly, as she normally would. She paused for just a moment and said, "So they have no idea?" I said, "Not yet, and I would like to keep it that way for now." Something was already quietly moving into place. But the worst moment of that evening was still about 4 hours away. Linda is the kind of ally most people never get. She does not announce herself. She does not perform loyalty. She simply knows what is true and stands beside it without being asked twice. She has managed the Harrington Grand for 11 years. She was there the week the trust transferred into my name. She sat across from me at the first operational meeting I ran as owner, and for 2 years she watched me make every staffing decision, every renovation call, every vendor negotiation without ever once needing a single person outside that building to know my name was on the deed.
She respected that.
I think she understood it in a way that did not require explanation. On the afternoon of the engagement party, about 90 minutes before the ballroom doors opened, Linda found me in the back corridor and handed me 2 folded documents, without ceremony. The first was the LLC registration for the Harrington Grand Hotel listed under the Claire E. Hendricks Commercial Trust. The second was the original transfer letter from Grandma Ruth's estate attorney, James, dated 2 years earlier, with my name and the property address printed clearly at the top. I folded both papers and placed them in the inside pocket of my coat, underneath the apron I had not yet put on but was already being expected to wear. Layer 1 of the receipts was in my pocket. Layer 2 was Linda herself, a woman with 11 years of institutional memory and 0 reason to lie about anything. What I did not know until later that evening was that my father had spent the pre-event dinner with Sophie's parents running a quiet counter-narrative. He told them I had always struggled professionally, that the family had tried to support me over the years, and that I preferred to stay invisible out of insecurity rather than ambition. He framed my silence as a character flaw. Sophie's mother, Carol, a composed and careful woman, apparently said very little in response. She nodded and moved the conversation forward. I have thought about that nod many times since. I think Carol was already doing the math. Here is something I want to ask you directly. If your family has ever described your silence as weakness while you were actually building something, go ahead and type yes in the comments. I have a feeling this section is going to fill up fast. The ballroom doors were about to open, and I was being handed an apron. The event began at 7 p.m. By 7:15, I was positioned near the back service corridor, holding a tray of champagne flutes, wearing the white catering apron my father had handed me that afternoon like it was the most natural thing in the world. Across the room, he stood near the main entrance greeting Sophie's family with both hands extended, laughing easily, playing the role of a man who had built something worth celebrating. He looked completely at home. I moved through the room the way the actual catering staff moved. Quietly, efficiently, eyes forward. The first public humiliation came about 20 minutes in. I was carrying a tray past the head table when Marcus spotted me. He was mid-conversation with a group of Sophie's cousins and he stopped, tilted his head, and said loudly enough for at least 20 people nearby to hear, "There she is. Even showed up to work tonight." Classic Claire.
A few people laughed.
Sophie looked briefly uncomfortable in the way people do when they sense something is wrong but cannot name it fast enough to stop it. My father, standing 8 feet away, smiled. I kept walking. The second humiliation came at 7:40. I was crossing the main floor when my father intercepted me, not privately, but directly in front of Carol and 2 other members of Sophie's family who had gathered near the centerpiece table. He gestured toward me and said, "She actually does better with tasks than decisions, always has." He said it warmly, the way someone delivers a fond observation about a person they have gently given up on.
Carol looked at me.
Not at my father. At me. She held eye contact for just a moment and said absolutely nothing, and I filed that look away because it did not feel like agreement. By 8:15, the room was at full capacity. The photographer was moving through the crowd. The toasts were being organized near the front. Marcus stood at the center of everything, exactly as designed, exactly as he always had been. My father surveyed the room with the satisfaction of a man who believed the evening was sealed. The image was complete, and the daughter was appropriately invisible. Then I looked toward the east corridor entrance and found Linda standing there. She gave me one small, steady nod. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something honest. If you had been standing in my shoes at that exact moment, apron on, documents in your coat pocket, would you have walked out or stayed? At 8:22, Linda stepped to the center of the ballroom and raised her hand in a calm, professional gesture to request the room's brief attention. This was not unusual. The Harrington Grand has a standard practice of offering a short welcome from hotel management at large private events, and most guests simply paused their conversations and turned politely toward her. It looked like a courtesy moment, a formality. My father smiled. He straightened slightly, clearly assuming this was a gracious toast directed at Marcus and Sophie, one more elegant detail of an evening he believed he had orchestrated perfectly. Linda thanked the Hendricks and Beaumont families for choosing the Harrington Grand for such a meaningful occasion. She said the staff had been honored to prepare every detail of the evening. And then she said she wanted to take a brief moment to acknowledge the owner of this property, who had personally been involved in ensuring the evening met the highest possible standard. She looked across the room directly at me. She said, "Claire Hendricks, thank you for your continued leadership of this hotel." The room did not erupt. It did something more powerful than that. It went completely silent in the particular way that only happens when 200 people simultaneously recalibrate something they believed was already settled. Glasses stopped midair. Conversations dissolved mid-sentence. I watched my father's face move through 3 distinct expressions in approximately 4 seconds, and I will let you imagine what those expressions were. I reached down, removed the apron, folded it carefully over the edge of the tray, and walked to the center of the room. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. I did not perform anything. I reached into my coat pocket and removed the LLC registration. I held it at a natural angle so that Carol and Sophie's father, who were standing closest to me, could see the document clearly. And I said, simply and evenly, I have owned this hotel for 2 years. Tonight was held on my property. I genuinely hope everyone enjoyed the evening.
Marcus said nothing.
He stood completely still. My father stepped forward, and I turned to face him. The room was watching. 200 people who had spent the evening watching the daughter carry the tray were now watching the daughter hold the deed. I said one sentence to him, quietly, without anger, without performance. I think we finally have the correct seating order. What happened next was not a fairy tale, and I think you deserve to hear it that way. The room did not break into applause. People did not rush toward me with validation. What actually happened was that 200 guests quietly redistributed themselves into small clusters the way people do when they have witnessed something they need to process privately before they can respond to it publicly. There was a low hum of conversation, a lot of sideways glances, and the particular social discomfort of a room full of people recalibrating everything they thought they understood about the evening. Marcus took Sophie gently by the elbow and guided her to a quieter corner of the ballroom. They spoke privately for several minutes. I did not watch them closely, but I noticed Sophie reach for his hand, which told me she was not angry at him, only trying to understand. Carol reached me within 4 minutes. She crossed the room with a kind of deliberate calm that told me she had been waiting for the right moment since at least 7:40. She extended her hand, looked me directly in the eyes, and said she was very glad to have finally met the real Claire. I shook her hand and thanked her, and meant it completely. My father did not apologize in the ballroom. He walked to the far end of the bar, ordered a drink, and stayed there for the remainder of the evening with his back angled slightly away from the room. That posture told me everything I needed to know about the apology I was not going to receive that night, or possibly ever. My mother, Diane, found me about 15 minutes later near the East Corridor. She did not say anything eloquent or surprising. She simply took my hand in both of hers and held it for a moment in silence. It was the most honest thing she had done in years, and I accepted it for exactly what it was, which was the most she knew how to give. The major open loop that closed that night was the one I had been carrying the longest. Whether anyone in that room, when finally given the full picture, would choose to see me clearly. Carol did. Diane did, in her quiet way. My father did not. 2 days later, Marcus called. He said he had not known about the hotel and that the whole situation had been unfair to me. I thanked him for calling, and I meant that too. My father left 3 voicemails that week. I did not return any of them. Justice does not always look like an apology, but it always looks like a choice. And I had finally made mine. The 6 months after the engagement party rebuilt my life in a shape that actually fit me, and I want to tell you what that looked like in practical terms because I think the practical part matters as much as the emotional part. The first thing I did was call James, the Nashville-based estate attorney who had handled Grandma Ruth's trust transfer. I asked him to formalize my full operational authority over the Harrington Grand Trust with updated documentation that left no interpretive room for anyone. I was not being paranoid. I simply understood by then that family narratives have a way of expanding into legal spaces when people feel they have something to reclaim, and I was not going to leave any ambiguity available for that to happen. James had the paperwork completed within 3 weeks. The second thing I did was say yes when Linda suggested we have dinner, just the 2 of us, to decompress. That dinner turned into a monthly standing plan that eventually grew to include 2 other women in the Nashville commercial property space, both of them straightforward and accomplished and entirely uninterested in performing anything for anyone. That group became my real chosen support system in a way that family had never quite managed to be. The third thing I did was take Grandma Ruth's brass keycard holder to a small frame shop on the east side of Nashville. I had it mounted in a simple dark frame with a small engraved plate along the bottom edge that reads, "Keys belong to people who show up." It sits on the credenza in my office at the Harrington Grand now, visible from my desk every single day. What once felt like a private comfort I did not fully understand became the clearest daily reminder I have that Ruth saw my future with more accuracy than anyone else in my family ever bothered to attempt. Which brings me to the final open loop, the one I had been carrying since I was 17 without knowing it was a loop at all. When I finally opened the brass keycard holder carefully, after all of it, I found a small folded index card tucked inside. Ruth's handwriting. It read, "This property will be yours when you are ready. Trust James at the firm." She had been planning my foundation for 11 years before I knew I needed one. Some people plant seeds in children they believe in. The harvest comes exactly when it is supposed to. If there is one thing I want you to carry away from tonight, let it be this. The person your family assigns the apron to is very often the person quietly holding the deed. Not always in a literal sense, though in my case it happened to be quite literal. But in every sense that matters, the one who gets handed the burden instead of the credit, the one who gets seated at the far end of the table closest to the kitchen, the one whose silence gets mistaken for weakness, that person is frequently building something the rest of the room cannot see yet. Being overlooked is not the same as being without power. I want you to really sit with that for a moment. Invisibility, when it is chosen or at least accepted with intention, can be the exact condition under which real and lasting power gets built. It stays protected because no one thinks to challenge what they do not believe exists. I am not estranged from my entire family. I want to be clear about that because I think the internet has a tendency to reward the most dramatic possible outcome, and I am not interested in performing one. I am simply no longer available for a role that was never actually mine to begin with. The scapegoat seat at the far end of the table has been vacant for several months now, and I have no plans to return to it. My father and I have spoken twice since that evening in the ballroom, briefly and with a distance that I want to be honest about. That distance is not punishment. It is not cruelty. It is simply the accurate measure of what trust actually exists between us when the image is removed and only the truth is left standing. If any part of tonight's story lives somewhere in your own life, I genuinely want to hear about it in the comments. You do not have to own a hotel for this to be your story. And if you want to hear what happened when Sophie's family later asked me to host the actual wedding at the Harrington Grand, that story is coming next. The person they handed the apron to ended up owning the whole floor.